This is the Mentors and Moguls podcast with Heather R. Stone.
Welcome to the Mentors and Moguls podcast. I'm your host, Heather Stone, and boy, am I excited to share my guest today with you. Her resume is quite impressive, so I'm just going to read it to you because it's way too much to memorize. Building Human Hearts in 2023. Dr. Doris Taylor's work has earned recognition from media outlets like 60 Minutes, CNN, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, National Geographic, ABC, NBC, CBS News, and many more worldwide media outlets. Dr. Doris Taylor is a pioneer and a global thought leader in regenerative medicine with over 20 patents in the field. Seriously.
Wow.
She achieved the first scientific repair of an injured heart with stem cells in 1998 and later produced a unique cell removal decellularization method for developing usable scaffold frameworks from untransplantable organs. In 2021, she co-founded Organimate Bio Inc. with a mission to generate cures for heart disease economically and bioengineer personalized replacement hearts on demand. So welcome, Dr. Taylor. It's lovely to have you here. I'm excited to have this conversation.
I'm the one that's excited. I'm sitting here with Heather R. Stone. You know who I met? And we were looking at a number of medical devices and whatever, and she goes, I know all this. This is awesome. I know this stuff. We gotta talk. And so I'm thrilled to be here. It's an honor. It's a privilege. Please call me Doris. And let's have some fun.
Let's have some fun. Let's get into it. So, Doris, when I met you at this futuristic conference about longevity, there were robots there were all these amazing things that we're not supposed to know about, that all these brilliant minds like Dr. Taylor has come up with all these gadgets and things that are going to help us live longer, healthier lives in the future, in the very near future. This is what you said to me. You said, hello, I'm Dr. Doris, and I'm here to solve the #1 killer of humanity. I was like, I gotta know what she's talking about. So share with us, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about heart disease. Heart disease kills 32% of all people on the planet. In the US, 48% of people have some form of heart disease. So if it's not her, it's me. If it's not her, it's her. Look to your right and look to your left, and if it's not them, it's you. The reality is half of the US population has some form of heart disease, and every 34 seconds, someone has a heart attack.
That's kind of a shocking statistic. So when you say heart disease, are you talking about someone with diabetes, someone with high cholesterol? Describe what is encompassed in heart disease.
So when I talk about those numbers, I'm talking about people with ischemic heart disease primarily, who've either had a heart attack or have high enough blood pressure that their heart is damaged, or who have other types of vascular disease in their coronary arteries typically, or they have heart failure. And I'm going to show a few slides that kind of talk about this a little bit, but I want to ask a question, especially since it's a bunch of women here. How many of you know a woman who's had breast cancer? Okay, most people in the room. How many of you know a woman who's had heart disease? 2 hands. Heather, 5 times more women have heart disease than have breast cancer. But we don't talk about it.
Wow.
And I would say part of why we don't talk about it is because we blame people for their heart disease. If you ate better, if you exercise more, if you didn't drink, if you blah, 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 you wouldn't have heart disease. And we shame people into not talking about those things. And the reality is 5 times more women have heart disease than breast cancer.
That's shocking.
we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, we were, a bunch of us were talking last night about how we don't talk about a lot of times in our lives. We don't talk about menopause, that's an example, but we certainly don't talk about heart disease. And heart disease doesn't have a face. If you see somebody with breast cancer, you think you know what they look like. Well, what I'm telling you is that you or the person next to you is what heart disease looks like.
That's kind of shocking. Should everyone get a checkup once a year and just ask for specific tests to see if they are suffering from heart disease or onset of heart disease?
Well, I certainly don't want to recommend medical advice to people, but what I will say is we know your blood pressure matters. We know inflammation matters. There's a test, there's some simple blood tests that measure inflammation like HSCRP that you know if it's at a certain level predicts your risk. We also know if you have, you know, we used to say if you have high cholesterol, you're at risk. Well, some of that's true, but the reality is it's stress, it's inflammation, it's all the things that we know. And we can come back to this in a little bit, but one of the things that I've been privileged enough to do in my career is show that acupuncture, meditation, mindfulness, things like that actually decrease your cardiovascular risk and can actually increase the number of circulating reparative cells that you have in your bloodstream. And I told some of you this story recently, but Heather, one of the things I got to do that was like Mississippi girl does good is I got to draw blood from some of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's monks.
Stop.
And measure stem cells before and after they meditated for 15 minutes on compassion.
Okay, I have so many questions, but we're going to stop those questions and let's follow this because tell me, what did you find?
So a 40% increase in stem cells in 15 minutes. Now, obviously, they're much better meditators than I am, but the data are what the data are. And the reality is that we know, we talk about it all the time. Exercise, we showed exercise increases your circulating stem cells. We showed, exercise, meditation, all the things we've been told all our lives, decrease stress, decrease heart disease. So, but every 34 seconds someone has a heart attack. I'm sitting here talking about this, but oh my gosh, I've had so many people work on this and so many people stand behind me, with me, together, believing in this, and otherwise I couldn't be doing what I'm doing. And that includes not only the people who've worked with me, but my spiritual sisters, my, people, all the people in my life who have allowed me to trust my crazy ideas. And one of the other things I'm really, really, really proud of is my team has been very diverse throughout my career. Mm-hmm. And it makes me happy because diverse people bring diverse ideas. Mm-hmm. So 1/3 of all deaths in the world, for men, women, and children.
And children.
Every 34 seconds, someone has a heart attack. The data now are that complex congenital heart disease means that 1% of the kids born in the US are going to need a heart transplant in their lifetime. Some of that's environmental exposures, some of that is genetics. That's not about not living right,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to tell you a story because it touched me so much. This mom, I didn't know her, she calls me, she goes, "Can I come visit your lab?" Okay. And by the way, this was February 2020, right? The world was about to change. So she comes to visit my lab, And she says that she wanted to meet me, so I showed her the lab, I showed her everything we were doing. I was in Houston at the time, and she sat me down and she said, I want to tell you about my daughter, Katerina. And she told me about her daughter. She took her daughter home from the hospital, didn't know anything was wrong, went back 2 days later, there was clearly a problem, and they spent, I can't remember if it was 6 weeks or 12 weeks in the NICU, right? And her daughter had to have multiple surgeries, and she said, what got me through every night in the hospital was you.
What was it?
It was about the hope of her daughter being able to live a normal life because of what we're doing. And that's why I get up and do this every day. You know, that's what makes it
Pretty
real.
good reason.
That's what makes it real, because of people like her, because of, you know, a man who knew he was passing heart disease, congenital heart disease along to his kids, genetic heart disease. And he said, you're not building organs, you're building hope.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that's the cool thing about this. Anyway, let's talk about doing it. Dr. Denton Cooley, one of the people who mentored me, one of the best cardiothoracic surgeon who ever lived, and he said, in our line of work, someone has to die for someone else to live.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that we only transplant 10 hearts a day in the US. 10. Do you know how many people need a heart every day? About 3,200.
Oh my goodness.
It's a little bit of a disconnect. And those are only the people who make the list.
Right.
If you're too old or you're too sick, if you're too old or if you're too young, if you're too sick, you're not sick enough, or if you cannot afford the drugs,
That's the shame.
you don't make the list. And there is a healthcare inequity here. If you're white, the average weight for a heart is 215 days-ish, plus or minus. If you're African American, even though African Americans have a higher incidence of heart disease and need more hearts, they wait at least 6 months longer, which means that many more die. And my goal is to change that. My goal is to build personalized hearts, build hearts from your stem cells or your stem cells, so that if you need it, you can get it. And even today, if you get a heart, you only get a heart if you're really sick, because there are so few. And you get it in an emergency procedure, you can only keep a heart for 4 hours after someone dies before it has to be transplanted. Which means if you don't live within 4 hours,
You're not getting them.
what you have to do if you're on the list is wear a pager and be near the hospital. So you have to live in an apartment somewhere to be able to get a heart. It's not a pretty picture. And then every day for the rest of your life, you have to take a drug to keep from rejecting that heart, which means, and these drugs are toxic. They cause high blood pressure, they cause diabetes, they put you at risk for cancer, they immunosuppress you, and if you miss one for one day, I had a young woman say to me, it's been 8 years since I got a heart. She said, I got a heart when I was 18. She said, it's been 8 years of medical tests, biopsies, and terror. She said, I've gone from having heart failure, it's true I don't have heart failure anymore, but now I have OCD and anxiety because I'm terrified that I'm gonna get so busy that I miss my drugs one day.
Wow. Wow. I don't know which, it's almost like a blessing and a curse handed to you at the same time.
It is, you're trading one disease for another. You get a heart, you get to live, you get a kidney, you get a liver, you get a lung, you get whatever, you get to live. You get to live, but it's not a quality life, and I want to change that. In 2005, I said, let's build a heart. So what we did, I said, how hard can it be? Because we knew how to take stem cells. And I said, you can see heart cells beating in a dish. If you just take heart cells and you put them in a dish, they'll beat. And I have to tell you, the first time I saw heart cells beat, I said, that's life. Wow, those are really alive. But then I said, how hard can it be? Let's just do it. And I said, those are heart cells, but they're not a heart. What's going to make them a heart? Putting them in a framework, a scaffold, an environment that teaches them how to be a heart. And this has been a real learning process for me. So we took 2 years, and we were able to take a little tiny heart like this, a rat heart, and we were able to strip all the cells out of it and put heart cells back in, and it started beating again.
Wow.
And when it started beating again, we then tried to publish it. It took us about 1.5 years to do the work. It took us 2 more years to publish it because it flew in the face of everything that was the status quo. And the people who were doing work that was the status quo tried to squash it. And I had one reviewer say, see, if you're in science or if you're in medicine, you have to get your papers reviewed by your peers, right? And I had one reviewer say, well, if it was still beating, she obviously didn't get all the cells out and blah, blah, so she just obviously didn't do a good job getting rid of all the cells. And I had another reviewer say, it's not novel. And I had another reviewer say, it's impossible. How do you respond to that? And so finally I called the editor, and I said, you can only keep a heart alive for 4 hours. If we treated a heart with baby shampoo to basically wash all the cells out and kept it alive for a week in the face of baby shampoo, then that deserves publishing anyway. And that's when the editor went, oh, and we got it published. And one of the coolest things in my life is I gave a talk recently, and there was a surgeon who introduced me, and he said, the paper she wrote in 2008 is the reason I'm in science today. How cool is that? Anyway, it took us 2 years to build this heart. And I was like, okay, we got to scale it up. Your heart's the size of your fist. It took us 14 more years to go from that tiny heart to a heart that was twice the size, from about almost 3 times the size, from 3 grams to 8 grams. Why is that? Because there's this little detail. Heart cells don't divide. So you can't take one and make more. And I maintain that that's because our hearts and our brains, which are the 2 organs where cells don't divide, I'm making this up, but it makes sense to me. They're the only 2 organs that are geometrically constrained. If you have too many cells in your skull, it's going to put pressure on your brain, and it's not compatible with life. If the geometry of your heart is not right, it's not going to pump blood, and that's not compatible with life. So I think those are the only 2 organs that don't have some degree of really intrinsic repair. That's a different story. But that meant we couldn't just take your heart cells, and grow billions of them. So I spent 14 years figuring out how to take human cells, make them into stem cells, and then grow the numbers we need for a heart. How many do we need for a heart? Your heart is the size of your fist. So it's usually anywhere from 100, in a woman, 120 to 150, maybe 200 grams, okay? Pick that number. You need 1.1 billion cells for every gram. So I had to figure out how to grow 500 billion cells. And nobody had ever really done that for stem cells. So it took us a long time. It took us 14 years. So then, 14 years later, we did it. I said, at that rate, it's going to take us 42 years to grow a heart that is large enough for even a young girl, much less an adult. And I lived in Houston at the time. I was at the Texas Medical Center. And the one thing I can tell you about Houston is if you think there's any place else in the world that's hot and gross and muggy, you haven't been to Houston. So why is that relevant? Air quality. Air quality is bad. And every time we had a failure, it was because it got contaminated from the air quality.
So then what?
So then we'd have to stop and start over. And so that would be months or months and months and months. And when Hurricane Harvey happened, we lost every heart we had going.
Oh my gosh.
You know, because the air quality went down the tubes in 24 hours. And so I said I had to do it differently. So I got smarter. And it looks like I'm really bummed because we're gonna have to figure this out. Let's try to go forward and see if this works. In 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, I said, I wanna do it differently, and I got smarter and I started a company. And I said, we have to automate this. So we developed a way to work with people to get robots to do it for us. And I had to teach a robot how to inject a heart and how to do all these things. And the cool thing was I got to fist bump the robot at the end. But what that meant is that in less than 1 year, we went from that 9-gram heart to a 50-gram heart. And that is a human heart that we built. And there's a cool story about this heart, if I may, and then I want to hear. So the cool story is that particular heart 42. The heart had, it was a weekend, and because we were doing this robotically, and because I was doing it with some other people and it was the middle of the pandemic, you can only get in the lab at certain times, okay? Well, it was a weekend, it was Saturday morning, and the heart's solution that it was in turned yellow. And what that means is either it had a drug in it or it needed to be fed, okay? And so I asked the people who had been there the night before, did you add this drug? And they told me no. And I was like, okay, then we have 8 hours to feed this heart or it's gonna die, right? 8 hours. But it's Saturday and no one will go in and feed the heart. And I'm halfway across the country and I can't get there to go in and feed the heart. And so what do? I pick up the phone and I call all my spiritual circle. And I said, we got a heart that needs your energy. And it needs your energy for the weekend to get us through. And a friend of mine got out her bowls. She played heart chakra music. She sent it to me. We played it in the lab. People that I trust sent spiritual energy to that heart for the weekend, and that was the best heart we ever made.
Didn't see that coming. That is the best story I've ever heard. It really responded. It stayed alive.
And, you know, it reinforced that building a heart is not just physical. It's about emotional, mental, and spiritual. And that's the other thing I've had to wrap my brain around is I couldn't do it. I haven't always done this right. I haven't always done this well. And there have been a lot of times I wear a bracelet that says I'm a badass. And the reason I wear that bracelet is because there are a lot of people in my life who've called me other things, right? And I've been called the B word more times than I want to care to admit. And what I do when I give lectures now for women is I say my version of the B word is best. So go for it. But I haven't always done this right. And I haven't always been kind and gentle because I felt so driven and passionate about what we were doing that I needed to say, come on guys, we're building, what, are you telling me nobody will go to the lab on a Saturday and feed a heart? Really? That's what you're telling me? That our heart's gonna, really? And what I realized, and I've had to go back and apologize to a lot of people, is that I wasn't putting out the energy for building hearts. I needed to get right myself, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, to be able to manifest this on the physical plane. Otherwise, it's going to be partially manifested and not fully manifested. Now, does that go over well with the venture capitalists I'm talking to? Not so much. But you know what? Then I remind them that if it's their son or their daughter, do they really care?
Right.
But you know what was really amazing, and I'll stop with this because I want to. I had a man say to me recently, and he was from Asia, and I was giving a talk in Europe, and he goes, well, the heart is a spiritual center, and there's a heart chakra. What are you doing if you're going to give somebody a heart? Aren't you going to change their heart chakra? Because I don't know if you know this, but in Japan, for example, and in some Asian countries, they don't believe in transplant for that reason, in part. And I said, you know what's so cool about what we're doing? We're taking your own cells that are already inculcated with your energy. At the end of the day, we're going to change the world for people with disease. 32%.
Big number.
Big number. Big number. And I have to say, so how do we start with the scaffold? I didn't talk about this.
So tell us about walk us through the process.
The process is really pretty cool. The first thing we do is we take blood or bone marrow or skin from a person, and then we use the technology that Yamanaka got the Nobel Prize for a number of years ago, and we turn those cells into stem cells, okay? And then we grow those stem cells to billions, the hundreds of billions that you need. And if you lined up those 100 billion cells, they would stretch for 42,000 miles. That's how many 100 billion cells is, okay? Or 500 billion cells is. It's a lot of cells. Anyway, we grow those cells, and then we have to turn them into heart cells. So we turn them into very, very immature heart cells. And what I should tell you is, what is a stem cell? A stem cell is a cell that responds to its environment and becomes like where it finds itself. And that makes me want to talk about something else later, but so we take these stem cells, and they're very, very, very immature stem cells. And then we take a scaffold that we call the ghost heart, and that's a heart, and we actually use pig hearts. The reason we use pig hearts is because we already use pig valves today. We know they're safe in people. We already use pig blood vessels in people today. We know they're safe in people. And the pig heart is the heart that most mimics the human heart. And pigs are smart. So we take a pig heart and we literally use a solution that's a high salt solution and then a low salt solution and then the equivalent of baby shampoo. And we run it through the blood vessels of the heart, and what it does is it bursts all the pig cells and washes them out. And so when you're left at the end, you have this heart with no cells, and it looks like a ghost heart. And then we take our stem cells and we inject them back into that scaffold. And when we do that, we then have to give them electricity, we have to give them a blood pressure, we have to give them oxygen, we have to give them all temperature, we have to give them all the things that you need in the human body, but then we have to train them. And so we have to crank that up every day. It's like the ultimate cardiovascular workout, right? We have to train them every day to grow up and become mature heart cells. And if you do it too fast, they die. It's like any muscle. If you damage it, you have to train them over time. And they start out kind of beating everywhere, because I told your heart stops at dish will beat, but then over time they coalesce and you start seeing the contraction of the heart. The final thing I'll say is we put the same stem cells everywhere, and they form the right regions of the heart because their environment, combined with that electricity and mechanics and physiology and cues that we don't understand, tell them what to become. So we watch development happen in the lab or in the little bioreactor. It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's you become attached. You have to, you care, and but you see these hearts mature over time. And not everybody's cells are the same, so we have to do it empirically for everyone. And a lot of people, a lot of people say, oh, this bullshit. And then you come see it, and you actually see one of these, and you just kind of walk away going, oh. And that's what I'm privileged enough to get to do every day. And my goal is to make hearts accessible, make them affordable, accessible, and as soon as they're safe and effective, get them out to people in the world. So I'm doing the part I hate right now, which is I'm on the road talking to people trying to raise money to do this, right? If we raise the right amount of money, in 5 years we'll put these in people. It's no longer science fiction. It's no longer, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when now. So and I sure didn't start out to do this, but here
So, amazing doesn't cover it. Awe-inspiring, jaw-dropping, all of this. Yeah, you put the medical community on alert that it can be done. So no one can deny it anymore. When I first heard about this, I'm not a very medical person, but when I first heard about this and then I went in deep dive and researching what you've done, in my very basic layman terms, I was captivated and excited, and I found myself cheering for you, and I can't believe, your story is amazing, but I'm going to take you back for a minute, but before I take you back, can you share with us what was it like for you? Because you're clearly mission driven, and the B word I like the best. You are a badass. You are mission driven, and that's what you would say about anybody. They're crazy because you're pushing the limits, saying, "Watch me, I can. We can do better. Let's figure it out." I can't imagine the amount of tenacity. Did you have days? So many questions. Did you have days in 14 years? Did you have days when you said, "Okay, I've got to stop this nonsense. Maybe it's too hard"? How did you keep going?
Every time you lose one of these hearts, it's like. I had a great teacher who said to me, the question you need to ask yourself is this mine to do? And I still ask myself that, because there are days now when I'm like, maybe it's time for someone else to do this. Is this still mine to do? That being said, there are days I have a close colleague, and he's a surgeon, he's a heart surgeon, and we made the agreement that we could go in my office and we could close the door and we could say every word we knew, every bad word we knew, and then we'd walk out and we'd do it again the next day. Oh. And we could say those bad words to each other, and we could say them about each other, and we'd get up and do it again the next day. And that's what it really sometimes just takes, because if it were easy, somebody else would have done it.
Right. Right.
If it were easy, it probably would already either be available or it would be patented and buried, and that's a different conversation.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this before we go back. What was it like the day you and your team realized we have a winner, we have achieved?
So, the very first heart, the very first tiny heart, the first time we saw that beating, that was one of those wow moments in my life. It was like, I mean, really, it was one of those wow moments. And it was like seeing life. I don't know how to, I mean, it was like seeing life. And I've only had a few moments like that in my life, and that was one of them. And interestingly, every time you build one, every time you bioengineer one, there's a lot of this, because you put the cells in and for 2 days you wait, because we can't do this with antibiotics or anything like that. So for 2 days you do this to hope it's sterile. You think it is, you know you've done everything you could. And so every time we get over that hurdle and we see it again, it's another thank you universe, And one of the things I'm trying to do, and I don't always do a good job of it, but I try to thank the pig. I try to remember to be grateful for the faith that people have in me, and I try to honor the fact that this is going to be a human heart. I mean, it's a really humbling responsibility, and I want to be able to be clear that this is something I would give my mom before I give someone else's mom. And that's what, and the number of people I've had say, well, it's so expensive. And I've said, I can build you the Kmart heart. Do you really want that? Do you want the heart that's going to work most minutes? Or do you want the heart that's going to work every minute of every hour of every day for the rest of your life? You decide.
So many questions with this. So we were talking earlier, and I said to you, okay, how long, if I needed a new heart, how long would it take you with this new technology? And you use robots still today? Okay. So how long would it take you with new technology if I needed a heart? If I asked you today and I had whatever it took to do that?
Okay, so there are two answers to that. One is the steps are you bank your cells now. So because the part that takes the longest in some senses is getting your cells, getting the number of cells. So what my way to think about this is people bank cord blood all the time, right? Let's start banking our stem cells. Let's start thinking about banking our stem cells. And I call them your fit cells, frozen in time. Let's start banking your stem cells, and then let's grow those and make kind of banks of your cells so that they're available. And that can take up to 12 weeks or 16 weeks. So that's a few months. But once we have your cells, we pull the scaffold off the shelf. And the cool thing about using pig scaffolds is I can say, okay, my heart's going to be a different size than your heart and your heart. So I can pick the scaffold that's going to match the size for your body. And that's one of the things you have to think about today. If a man dies and a woman needs a heart, you can't always put that heart in, it's too big. And so you have to pick the right size for the body. Or if a woman dies and the man needs a heart, you can always put that in because it's not big enough. So you have to pick the right size. We can do that with the pig. So then we start growing your heart, and that takes about 12 weeks. And it's not a long time, but we've tried to develop a process so that if it's going to fail, it fails early. So we can start over and do it again. And that's why I don't want to just wait till the last minute to grow your cells.
Right.
I want to have your cells available to do whatever I need to do. Plus, as the world changes, there's going to be more uses for your cells.
Yes, that I see and know and experience myself. So I'm not 17. I think, wow, I don't know what my future holds. If I wanted to bank my cells, am I too old at this point? And is there a place, are they readily available where I can go to bank my cells?
So that's what I would say to you is your cells are younger today than they're going to be tomorrow, right? Right?
This is true.
And the other thing, so we're trying to build some of that infrastructure. Some of that infrastructure is starting to come online, and some of the umbilical cord blood banks are coming online. But the reality is, you can't just bank your cells and then go get them and use them today. That is not legal. It is not legal because the FDA has defined the use of cells for, it's called homologous use. So you have to take them and use them for the same thing they were being used for in the body. So what we have to do is, that's why we have to do a clinical trial and go to the FDA to show that we haven't done something to those cells to make them unsafe for you. But there's also a recognition now by the FDA and by the government that that came about with what's called the 21st Century Cures Act, that you can get a regenerative medicine advanced therapeutic designation and move your therapy fast through the FDA. There's also the awareness that came with the pandemic that if you need to, you can do it. And that maybe we need to look at things differently. Regenerative medicine therapies, unlike anything else, you can't take back.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe our responsibility is higher because you take a drug, it goes away.
Mm-hmm.
You take a cell, the goal is to make it stay. Mm-hmm. So if we're really trying to give you something that's going to be there for the rest of your life, then our responsibility is higher. And I support that as long as we don't get tied up in the politics of that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So are exosomes the same thing as stem cell therapy?
No, and it's funny. Exosomes are little vesicles that stem cells and other cells secrete. They're one way that stem cells and cells in our body tell our body that it needs to repair itself. Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting is I gave a talk in probably 2000. And I said, in 10 years, we won't be talking about cells, we'll be talking about what cells secrete. Mm-hmm. Well, now people are giving exosomes and basically, I told you we have to feed the hearts. We have to feed cells too. And so what you do is you grow the cells in this dish and you feed them, and then you collect the liquid you fed them with, and then you purify those particles out of that, and that's what exosomes are. They're the little particles that the cells made that are part of the signaling process for our body.
That's fascinating. There's so many questions. Let me take you back now.
Yeah.
Because you have a story beyond this mission. And as a woman, and a woman who fights for other women to really show up and push themselves out of their comfort zone and be more and step into more, whatever that more is. You are a shining example of that, probably on steroids and then some. But can you just share with the audience a little bit about how did you start and how many no's did you get before you got a yes? Because this part is equally as fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I got into trying to change the world for people with disease because when I was a little kid, my dad died. When my dad died, I didn't want anybody else to ever have to go through that pain, right? So, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with that. I just knew, and I grew up in Mississippi. And I grew up in Mississippi in a single parent family, and my mom was awesome because my dad had died. And in Mississippi, my mom always pointed out that there were ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And so I got to see that every day, and I got to see just normal people standing up and changing the world. And I think it made me, one, realize that was possible, and two, see it. The other thing that I have to mention is I had a twin brother, and neither my brother or I were supposed to live when we were born. We both weighed less than 2 pounds, and that was a long time ago. And my mom tells the story, so I guess she tells the story that the hospital chaplain or whatever came in and said, you know, if you believe in doing last rites for your kids, you should, because they're not going to live. And so my mom said, she went, okay, and the chaplain came in and did that. She says, since the chaplain did that, my brother and I apparently went, screw you, because we started getting better. and so we started getting better. But I grew up with a twin brother who had cerebral palsy, and then as an adult became schizophrenic. Okay? So my mom was an amazing woman who did everything for my brother. I mean, our family revolved around, my mom bought one of the first, she was a single parent in Mississippi, she bought one of the first electric typewriters so he could write. You know, it was amazing. Anyway, so I grew up seeing people do things that I didn't know you didn't just do that, right? I thought you just did that, whatever that was. And the other thing is I saw, and this changed my world. I went with my mom to take my brother to Memphis for cerebral palsy. I can't remember what the place was called, but there was a clinic there. And my brother was in seeing the doctor, and I was going around doing stuff I shouldn't do, right? And I walk in this room, and there's this kid who is so excited. And he was 12 years old, and he had just learned how to sit up. And what made him excited was that he had just learned how to sit up, and I was like, oh, the world is different than I thought it was. So I really got to see some amazing things that made me realize amazing things were possible. We take who we are with us, right? And so I've been trying to build hearts. And what I've realized is it's about trying to build heart. And in the last year, I've really had this realization that I'm building a heart, but I'm being surrounded by people who are building heart. And the people who are building heart are as much a part of my building a heart as our being able to do this. And I say my, and I say I. Let me be really clear. It's not I and it's not me. It is the team of people who are willing to think about this 24/7, 365, so that your mom can have what she needs. And they're amazing people, and they're brilliant, and they get it, and they work with me knowing that I can be the B word sometimes, and you know, I'm upfront about who I am and where I come from, and what I think that does is it lets people it's been a long process for me, but it lets people engage and get it that what they're doing, we spend more time at work than we do at home.
That's right. That's right.
So I have a slide that says, find out what you enjoy and make more of it.
Yeah.
Because if you do, I mean, I got to do a flash mob for Stephen Hawking.
What? Okay, didn't see that coming. Please tell us that story.
Isn't that like the coolest thing?
So I don't know what to say to that. Tell me the story.
So what,
By the way.
Stem Cell Universe, right?
Okay.
He did this program, Stem Cell Universe. And he would always tell these stories about the universe and the stem cell universe. And so he was really intrigued by what we were doing. And we all dressed up in different colored t-shirts, and we put together this kind of choreography that was like a beating heart.
Of course you did.
And we had people that were dressed in white on the outside of the heart, framing the shape of the heart because it was like the ghost heart. And then we did these beating things in it, and we got to do a flash mob for Stephen Hawking.
And what was his reaction?
At some level it was, you know, when nerds try to have a good time.
I bet it was wonderful. You know, I have to say, listening to you, you are building heart. You are having an impact. You're having an impact in so many ways that you probably are oblivious to, but everything is positive. You're inspiring, you're encouraging, but you exemplify heart. What you've done, you haven't quit. You've gotten more mountains underneath your feet than most people have ever read about or heard about. It's amazing. There's something that you said earlier that I must ask you about.
Yes. What?
You are the first doctor, physician, scientist, not that I know a ton. You're the first person in your line of work that has spoken about spirituality and the proof of science together in unison to create something. That is not something that's normally in the same conversation.
Right.
Where does that come from with you?
Right. So I don't think you can work with the heart and not do that. I think it changes you somehow. I mean, I don't think you can. The first time I held a human heart in my hand, I cried. You know, it's humbling. I don't think you can do this and not be changed by it. That being said, you know, science. When you go out and think about science or think about an idea, you're not going with you're going with your gut, right? A hypothesis is something that you're going with that you can't see, you can't touch, you can't feel, and you have to go out and collect data in support of or refutation of that. And so it's not any different than spirituality. It's really just, what do you choose to pay attention to? What data is going to work? And especially I love it because especially as quantum physics has gotten has moved into the normal conversation, people are being forced to acknowledge that maybe there's more. And for me, I think, well, first of all, so stem cells. I talked earlier about stem cells, and I said,
Stem cells.
Well, and I said, inflammation is nature's cue to say, help, I've got an injury, send me cells. That's my worldview, okay? And if you get the right cells there, which are reparative cells, you cut off the inflammation, and that's why we give stem cell therapy. It's to actually maximize endogenous repair. And the one thing we know stem cells do is they shut down that pro-inflammatory loop in real time, okay? So you have acute inflammation to get the right cells there for repair. If you get the right cells there, you turn it off. If you don't, your body ramps up that inflammation. It goes, damn it, I said send me cells. And then you start recruiting the wrong cells, pro-inflammatory cells. And that's how you get a chronic inflammatory response, which is not good for you. And that starts to cause damage. And by the way, we did an experiment. I'm going to say this even, I don't know where we are on time, but I'm going to tell this really quickly. We did an experiment where we wanted to look at stem cells. And so at the time in the lab, people were saying, okay, you got to use mice because that's what we know about stem cells. And I hate doing those experiments, but I did. And I said, okay, I want to prove that the stem cells did it. So I'm going to use male stem cells in female mice. I'm going to use female stem cells in male mice so that I can look at the Y chromosome in the cells and know where the cells came from to treat atherosclerosis and heart disease, okay? Well, the female cells worked and the male cells didn't.
Why?
That's when I said, was there something different about the male and female cells? And so I went back and did one of the first looks at stem cells in men and women. And guess what? They're different. And guess what? You can watch, so men develop heart disease early in life and it levels off. And women develop heart disease later in life and they catch up with men in about their 70s, okay? Well, if you look at the stem cells we were looking at, in men, they go down earlier in life and they have a lot more pro-inflammatory cells. Does that surprise anyone in the room? Just saying. And women's cells actually go down later. The positive cells go down later, coincident with the rise of heart disease. And so we were kind of the first to show that. And since then, we've done a lot of sex differences analyses and shown heart disease is different in men and women. Heart disease is heart disease, and how you treat heart disease is different in men and women. And if women have the same inflammatory profile as men, then they develop heart disease that looks like men. So we've done all this work to show that endogenous repair is about this whole inflammatory thing and getting the right cells there to change what's going on with inflammation in your body. And one of the reasons we do stem cell therapy for heart disease and a number of diseases is not because you don't have those stem cells in your body, you do, but you can't get them there in the right period of time to actually mediate the repair. Or maybe they're needed in an area of the body that's not really accessible, like your spinal cord or your joints or your whatever. And so if you can deliver them, you can mediate that repair. Okay, all of that. So I learned a lot about how hotness and inflammation and stress and all of that is about recruiting stem cells. And then I started looking at the world. And I went, so there's all this inflammation in the world. And there's all this whatever going on in the world. And I had this realization because many spiritual teachings say as above, so below, right? And I read a book where there was a Buddhist monk looking at the sky. And he talked to his student about how the universe, we as people are just like those stars. We're kind of like whatever. And I went, oh my God, we're the stem cells for the planet. Well, that's number one. I got it. That I believe those of us with the spiritual awareness are the people who need to raise the vibratory level of the planet. Because you know how waves do this? Well, right now I think our planet's right here. And I think we need to be doing the inverse of that to get us back to level set. with our energy. That's number one. But number two, we know that we can change, but biofeedback, all those things that we do, we know we can change how our body repairs itself. We know, I've already said, acupuncture, meditation, all those exercise, all those things increase your stem cells, right? But I also know that your stem cells are going to be different than my stem cells. You exercise a hell of a lot more than I do. You're going to have better stem cells right now. I can change that. That being said, I also know that all of us are different, and it made me stop and think about the fact that we all have different cells, but we also all have different resonances, right? Do you know what I mean when I say that? Well, so I had a spiritual group, and I gave them a circle, and I said, okay, I want you to think of a time in your life when you were doing something and you were in perfect resonance with yourself, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And I gave them that circle, and I said, okay, draw that on the circle, whatever it is. And then I said, that's your divine stem cell. And I want you to take that forward, and when you are in a place of whatever it is, I want you to see whatever it is you chose. It can be a visual, it can be a sound, it can be whatever you chose to put on that. And that's your divine stem cell. And a friend of mine who's about the Divine Mother said, it's your Divine Mother cell. And I was like, okay, it's your divine, but that's your resonant cell. So when people start thinking about endogenous repair processes, I try to encourage them to think about that in a way that is resonant with their body, not my body or somebody else's. And then I gave them another circle on a piece of paper, and I said, okay, you are the divine stem cell for the planet. I want you to create your vision of that going forward and how your resonance can change the resonance on the planet. So I've shared that's my belief. Take what you want and leave the rest. But if it works for you, you're raising your vibratory rate, and we know viruses, bacteria, things like that. If you put them at a high vibratory rate, they die. We know that. We know that one last cool anecdote. I did an experiment at Duke. Well, I did 2 experiments at Duke. One was I participated in a clinical trial that looked at music, imagery, and touch, and its effect on heart disease. But we also did this cool experiment where we took this guy. We know that if you take a red blood cell and you mix it with water, because it can't control its volume, at 7 minutes, that cell will die. It will burst, okay? We know that. That's just science. So there was a guy who was talking about cells emitting light. So I said, well, let's do this experiment. So we took these red blood cells and we put them in water, and we put them in a photometer, dark. We're standing there in the dark, and at 7 minutes when those cells were going to die, they emitted light.
Okay, explain that.
And I was like, well, wait a minute. I thought light was supposed to be a good thing, right? And then he put cancer cells in there, and they emit light all the time. And I was like, okay, I'm not totally getting this. And then I realized it's the wavelength of light. If you ever look at a picture, a micrograph, a microscope image of a cancer cell, it looks mad. It looks mad. You get this reaction to it of, oh my God, that's anger, epitomized right there. Mm-hmm. And it's got all these projections going out, and it just looks angry. And there's so many examples of as above, so below, and all of this. You can, when we take all the cells out of a scaffold, I call it decell because people don't want to say decellularization, and recell, decell, recell. What's left is this structure that, have you ever seen a honeycomb, the six-sided honeycomb or the six-sided,
Right.
it looks like that. All these compartments that look like those six-sided things, and I'm like, nature's got it figured out. We just have to go along for the ride. So I have 2 mantras. One is give nature the tools and get out of the way, because we're never gonna know every detail. And if we have to know every detail, we're never gonna get it to a patient. So that's number 1. And the other is trust your crazy ideas. Trust your crazy ideas.
That's a perfect way to end this. I thank you. We're going to talk a lot more after this. I thank you so much
Thank you.
for sharing your wisdom. I thank you for your tenacity. I thank you for your bravery. And I thank you for being just a graceful, intelligent badass that you are.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mentors and Moguls podcast. We hope you've been inspired by the incredible stories and wisdom shared by our esteemed guest. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review and share it with others that may benefit from the valuable insights shared here. Until next time, stay inspired, stay motivated, and keep making your mark in the world.